Storytime with HannahMary Presents The Princess and Curdie by George MacDonald. Chapter 18 The King's Kitchen. Back to the cellar Curdie and Lena sped with their booty, where, seated on the steps, Curdie lighted his bit of candle for a moment. A very little bit it was now, but they did not waste much of it in examination of the pie. That they effected by a more summary process. Curdie thought it the nicest food he had ever tasted, and between them they soon ate it up. Then Curdie would have thrown the dish along with the bones into the water, that there might be no traces of them, but he thought of his mother and hid it instead, and the very next minute they wanted it to draw some wine into. He was careful it should be from the cask of which he had seen the butler drink. Then they sat down again on the steps and waited until the house should be quiet. For he was there to do something, and if it did not come to him in the cellar, he must go to meet it in other places. Therefore, lest he should fall asleep, he set the end of the helve of his mattock on the ground, and seated himself on the cross part, leaning against the wall, so that as long as he kept awake, he should rest, but the moment he began to fall asleep, he must fall awake instead. He quite expected some of the servants would visit the cellar again that night, but whether it was that they were afraid of each other, or believed more of the butler's story than they had chosen to allow, not one of them appeared. When at length he thought he might venture, he shouldered his mattock and crept up the stair. The lamp was out in the passage, but he could not miss his way to the servants' hall. Trusting to Lena's quickness in concealing herself, he took her with him. When they reached the hall, they found it quiet and nearly dark. The last of the great fire was glowing red, but giving little light. Curdie stood and warmed himself for a few moments. Miner as he was, he had found the cellar cold to sit in, doing nothing, and standing thus, he thought of looking if there were any bits of candle about. There were many candlesticks on the supper table, but to his disappointment and indignation, their candles seemed to have all been left to burn out, and some of them, indeed, he found still hot in the neck. Presently, one after another, he came upon several men fast asleep, most of them upon tables, one in a chair, and one on the floor. They seemed from their shape and colour to have eaten and drunk so much that they might be burned alive without waking. He grasped the hand of each in succession, and found 2 ox hoofs, 3 pig hoofs, one concerning which he could not be sure whether it was the hoof of a donkey or a pony, and 1 dog's paw. A nice set of people to be about a king, thought Curdie to himself, and turned again to his candle hunt. He did at last find 2 or 3 little pieces, and stowed them away in his pockets. They now left the hall by another door, and entered a short passage, which led them to the huge kitchen, vaulted and black with smoke. There too the fire was still burning, so that he was able to see a little of the state of things in this quarter also. The place was dirty and disorderly. In a recess, on a heap of brushwood, lay a kitchen maid, with a table cover around her, and a skillet in her hand. Evidently she too had been drinking. In another corner lay a page, and Curdie noted how like his dress was to his own. In the cinders before the hearth were huddled 3 dogs and 5 cats, all fast asleep, while the rats were running about the floor. Curdie's heart ached to think of the lovely child princess living over such a sty. The mine was a paradise to a palace with such servants in it. Leaving the kitchen, he got into the region of the sculleries. There horrible smells were wandering about, like evil spirits that come forth with the darkness. He lighted a candle, but only to see ugly sights. Everywhere was filth and disorder. Mangy turnspit dogs were lying about, and grey rats were gnawing at refuse in the sinks. It was like a hideous dream. He felt as if he should never get out of it, and longed for one glimpse of his mother's poor little kitchen, so clean and bright and airy. Turning from it at last, in miserable disgust, he almost ran back through the kitchen, re-entered the hall, and crossed it to another door. It opened upon a wider passage, leading to an arch in a stately corridor, all its length lighted by lamps in niches. At the end of it was a large and beautiful hall with great pillars. There sat 3 men in the royal livery, fast asleep, each in a great armchair, with his feet on a huge footstool. They looked like fools dreaming themselves kings, and Lena looked as if she longed to throttle them. At one side of the hall was the grand staircase, and they went up. Everything that now met Curdie's eyes was rich, not glorious like the splendors of the mountain cavern, but rich and soft, except where, now and then, some rough old rib of the ancient fortress came through, hard and discolored. Now some dark bare arch of stone, now some rugged and blackened pillar, now some huge beam, brown with the smoke and dust of centuries, looked like a thistle in the midst of daisies, or a rock in a smooth lawn. They wandered about a good while, again and again finding themselves where they had been before. Gradually, however, Curdie was gaining some idea of the place. By and by, Lena began to look frightened, and as they went on, Curdie saw that she looked more and more frightened. Now, by this time he had come to understand that what made her look frightened was always the fear of frightening, and he therefore concluded they must be drawing nigh to somebody. At last, in a gorgeously painted gallery, he saw a curtain of crimson, and on the curtain a royal crown wrought in silks and stones. He felt sure this must be the king's chamber, and it was here he was wanted, or, if it was not the place he was bound for, something would meet him and turn him aside. For he had come to think that so long as a man wants to do right, he may go where he can. When he can go no further, then it is not the way. Only, said his father, in assenting to the theory, he must really want to do right, and not merely fancy he does. He must want it with his heart and will, and not with his rag of a tongue. So he gently lifted the corner of the curtain, and there behind it was a half-open door. He entered, and the moment he was in, Lena stretched herself along the threshold between the curtain and the door. End of chapter 18. Find more stories on Instagram at storytime.with.HannahMary.